Hi, I'm Tiana Shoei. I'm a writer, entrepreneur, leader, and energy. This is my podcast, Ain't Quite Right. Join me as we laugh, learn, and live big. Hello, everyone. This is Tiana Shoei, and welcome to my podcast, Tiana Shoei Ain't Quite Right. Now, if you did not listen to the prior episode, go back and listen to it. We had a great interview with my personal friend and medical doctor, Dr. John Henry, and we had a great discussion. Very fortunate to have him agree to participate. And he just talked to us about the basics of physical health. It's something I'm very passionate about, physical health. And that is why I wanted to chat with Dr. John, because he is obviously, as a medical doctor, somebody who has expertise in physical health. But, I'm also a firm believer that if you're physically unhealthy, you're not the best version of yourself. If you don't feel good, you can't make the same quality decisions that somebody who feels good can make. And so just learning how to take care of those foundational pieces of being healthy, he gave some great nuggets. If you haven't listened to that episode, I suggest listening to it. Now, I have a little bit of a confession to make. Today's topic was not on my planned list of topics. I actually sit down weeks in advance, plan out what each podcast topic is going to be, and kind of had a routine and a flow I was going to go through. But the reason that I deviated away from my schedule and the topics I was originally going to cover is because I've heard this term brought up to me multiple times over the past couple of months. And since I keep hearing it, and since people keep telling me that this is something they're struggling with, I figure that if I'm seeing it in the small little microcosm that I see in my life, then it must impact more people than just the people that I'm dealing with. And so I want to talk about something that I think is more prevalent and more predominant in our society than we probably realize, because nobody's really talking about it. Now, I've listened to a couple podcasts on this topic from big influencers who all say that they struggle with this as well. So I think that by more of us bringing this topic forward and more of us talking about it, it's going to help us to address this issue because it seems to be pretty widespread. So on that note, if you struggle with this, let's talk about it. Shoot me a message. You can go to my website, tianashoei.com. There's a contact page. Reach out to me. That'll send me an email and we can dialogue via email. I really want to talk to anybody who's struggling with this because I don't believe this is something that you have to stick with. So what is this thing, this mysterious topic that I'm that I'm talking about? It's imposter syndrome. I have had multiple people in varieties of conversations, just we're chatting about something and say, yeah, I'm really struggling with imposter syndrome. And as I've learned more about this, I've done reading and like I said, listen to podcasts, and there's certainly psychological takes on this. I'm not trying to produce, what's the word I'm thinking of? Me at a loss for words. Who is this? Let me put it this way. This conversation, I'm not trying to come up with a psychological analysis of imposter syndrome because, well, that's nice. And while I really enjoy that, the nerd in me likes to sit down and understand these things. The way I want to talk about it today is I want to talk about practically what it's like to feel like when you have imposter syndrome, and then ways of dealing with it. Because yes, we could go into all the psychological theories as to why you feel this way and what the root cause and all these other things are. But while those are great, that's not the purpose of this podcast. This podcast is about reaching you where you're at and finding practical solutions and practical ways to grow through these really uncomfortable things. So let's talk about imposter syndrome, not from a intellectual definition or, why am I struggling with this word? I can't believe I'm struggling with this word. Anyway, when it comes to me, I'll say it. But, we're not trying to dissect this from a very theoretical, definition. What we're trying to do, academic, I don't know why that word was so hard. Hello, it's not that hard of a word. We're not trying to, approach this from an academic perspective. What we're trying to approach this from is a practical, realistic, I deal with imposter syndrome. And, this is real. It at times it can cripple me. That's the kind of perspective I want to meet you with today. Let's just talk about this. Let's have an honest discussion about what it's like to have imposter syndrome, and then what the antidote to imposter syndrome is, how we overcome this sensation or the sense that if other people find out who I really am, they're going to think I'm a fraud and my life's going to be over. Because that's really the narrative and the story we're telling ourselves when imposter syndrome is dominating our thoughts. If other people knew what I know about myself, then they would reject me. We've got this narrative, this storyline that we're telling ourselves when we struggle with imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome? It manifests itself in a lot of different ways, but I think at the core of what most people experience when they experience imposter syndrome is they experience some sense of forbearing, fear, some sense of again, feeling like you're an imposter. Like if people knew that I really, you believe that there's a disconnect between who people think you are and who you actually are. And you have this fear that if people really knew who you were, then they would reject you. So I think at the core of imposter syndrome is this fear of not being accepted by other people for who you are. And so we feel this need to kind of keep up all of these pretenses to hide our imposter. So as usual, we start each podcast off with a quote and we end with a quote when I don't have a wonderful guest like Doc last episode. I don't know why I said last week, because it's every other week we have this episode. And I'm going to throw a lot of quotes at you because there's a lot of quotes that I think that are going to reframe how we should think about this. But this quote is really powerful. It's from Dennis Waitley. And he said, "It's not what you are that holds you back. It's what you think you are not." It's not what you are that holds you back. It's what you think you're not. As I was saying, as we're kind of talking about imposter syndrome, at the core of imposter syndrome is really a fear of being rejected by other people. And, everybody has this. What's funny about being a podcast host is the only way I was able to take the time to figure out how to run a podcast, because remember, I just started this back in July of 2020. I didn't know the first thing about podcasting. I knew how to listen to podcasts. I listened to all kinds of podcasts, but I didn't know anything about actually podcasting. So I had to learn, what equipment do I get? What do you use to set up a podcast? I had to learn all of the basics. How do you record one? How do you edit one? What makes good content? What makes people want to listen to you? In order to get to that point, I had to just get over that same sensation, that same fear of imposter syndrome. I didn't know at the time that I struggled with imposter syndrome for most of my life. That was exacerbated by the fact that I was and still am in a professional line of work that it is highly frowned upon if you are not college educated. And I was told by leaders, I was held back by HR departments at companies that I worked for because I didn't have a college degree. It didn't matter that my work performed equally as my peers. It didn't matter that, there weren't huge gaps in the quality of what I was able to produce. It's just, I didn't have that one particular, 4 years period in my life where I devoted to studying with the proof that I came out with an adequate understanding of the subject to be able to move forward. That created a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome in me. So I unintentionally, when people would ask me, where'd you go to school? Well, I wouldn't lie to people, but I would kind of omit the truth, because the truth was that my senior year in high school, I started attending college. And there's a lot of reasons why I didn't go to college. I'm not going to go through those today because that's not the point of today's discussion. But I did start college. And so I would tell people where I started college. I just would leave off the fact I never finished because I was so afraid that if people knew that I didn't have a college degree, that they were going to immediately write me off. And by the way, that is true. A lot of people in our industry did write me off because I didn't have a college degree. But here's what I've learned as I've gone through this process. And I'm going to walk you through this because I want you to realize that more people have imposter syndrome than you think. I think the world, let me give you a prime example. And I'm not trying to diagnose or put a label on anybody, but I think we confuse people who appear to be confident with people who don't have confidence issues. And I think one of those people that really kind of shook us up was Robin Williams. Nobody in a million years would have imagined that Robin Williams was so unhappy that he took his own life. And so, the reason why I'm not trying to say that Robin Williams had imposter syndrome, but the reason I bring him up in this discussion is to say, don't judge a book by its cover. People can get really good at hiding what's underneath the surface. That's why I have this podcast, because I'm trying to blow off the pretenses and the covers and all of these bizarre kind of scenarios we put ourselves in to help us fit in or help deal with the anxiety or the fear of rejection and the fear of all these things that we carry with us, and have real, honest discussions with you guys. I struggled to have confidence. And if you've known me post recovering from being a battered woman, it would blow your mind that somebody like me, who can get on the microphone and produce a podcast and put it out for the world to hear, it's scary for me every time. Every time there's a voice in my head that says, are you sure about this? People might not like it. Here's the difference though. I learned to recognize the narrative and the story that I was telling myself, and I stopped giving it a voice. And instead, I made a decision that the truth was going to be the narrative that led my inner thoughts. One of the best quotes I've heard, and this is from Craig Groeschel, which, by the way, he just released a new book. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I think I downloaded it on my Audible. I am just finished with my latest book, so I'll be listening to that, is Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Groeschel. And here's what Craig Groeschel says that is so true. Your life is moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. And so one of the things that, again, we don't talk about enough in our society is becoming aware of your thought process. In psychology, it's called metacognition. You're becoming aware of your internal dialogue. This is one of my primary roles as a coach. Again, as a coach, it's not my job to tell anybody how to live their life. It's my job to point out the tools and resources and to pull the greatest version of a person out of them, because everybody has greatness in them, even if they don't realize it. That's what I do as a coach. I'm just a gold digger in the best sense. Everybody has gold in them. I've spent time in prisons. I have spent time in orphanages. I've spent time in third world countries. Everybody has gold in them. They just need to find it. And that's what imposter syndrome really is. At the heart of it is we've stopped digging for our own personal gold. We've stopped seeing our greatness. And we have instead created an internal dialogue around fear and around things that are just not true. It's amazing to me when I start working with a client and they start talking about where they are as a coach, and instantly I'm like, you are telling yourself an untrue story about yourself. You've got this dialogue going on that's so untrue. And that's what imposter syndrome is. It's this internal dialogue that we are allowing to dominate our thought process. I've used this quote before, and I'm going to use it again because, deep quotes have many different manifestations of how you can internalize them and use them. But this is a Henry Ford quote. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Which is reaffirming what Craig Groeschel said. Your life is moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. It's not what you think you are that holds you back. It's what you think you're not. So I want to share my personal journey with you on this. And I want to share with you the things that I learned and how I dealt with imposter syndrome in my own life. Going into a professional line of work where I was immediately discredited because I didn't have a college degree. I can't even begin to tell you how much persecution I've dealt with on this. You add on top of that, and I haven't talked about it on this podcast, but I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag. I've talked about it on my Made to Conquer podcast, but on this podcast, I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag. I was a sexually abused child, and that created deep scars of worthlessness within me. It's very hard to describe unless you are a person who's been sexually abused, especially because I was very young when my sexual abuse started. It was by, outside people who got their hands on me. You feel dirty. You feel gross. You feel less than. There was a sense about me that I knew I was different than all the other kids around me because I had this dirty, nasty secret in this part of me that was very, very, very hard to deal with as a young person. And honestly, it wasn't until in my late 30s before I really actually had a healthy handle on how I dealt with this trauma in my past. And it was really just changing the way I thought about it that allowed me to not see myself as a victim or a dirty person anymore, but to see myself as somebody who was taken advantage of, and it didn't define me any longer. So you add the fact that I was a sexually abused child to what led me ultimately to get into abusive relationships. I got married at 18 years old to a very abusive person. And, that led me into a series of abusive relationships. And I got divorced from that person, got into another abusive relationship, got out of that relationship, and then got into another series of abusive relationships. And it wasn't until I sought professional help and got some therapy that I dealt with my battered woman syndrome and slowly began to become a healthy person. I am not standing here today because I've had a perfect life. I'm standing here today because I was so broken, so scared, so hurt, had such low confidence, but I could stand on a stage because in some of my prior jobs, I used to give presentations. I've given 4-hour presentations. I've given 2-hour presentations. I've stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people. I've had the audiences laughing so hard that I was told if I ever get out of my career as an insurance person, that I've got a job as a stand-up comedian. I know you don't believe that because I don't joke enough on this podcast. I'm sorry. It's because I'm so serious. I need to be less serious. I love to joke. I love to have fun. I could do all that, but inside I was dying. Inside I was so afraid of don't have a personal conversation with me because then you might know that I'm a fraud. I have lived Imposter Syndrome 101. I felt like I was keeping up two versions of myself, one that everybody got to see, and then one that was the real version of me, which was this scared, broken person. And because I had a propensity to be attracted to abusive people, I found myself constantly surrounded by abusive people. And to make things worse, I didn't know how to have healthy boundaries, and boundaries scared me. So rather than deal with abusive situations in my life, I just continued to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink until finally one day I literally had what was the most bizarre situation in my life where I had a complete and total panic attack, I guess is what you'd call it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stop crying. I had no control over my body. I was just freaking out. And I won't go into the details of the situation, but it was induced by somebody who was expecting more of me than was realistic and putting very undue pressure on me. And, I'm not the kind of person that abdicates my responsibility, but it was just an unhealthy relationship. Okay. Let me put it that way. And I had this complete and total meltdown. And that's in that moment I realized I've lost control and I've got to get healthy. And that is what ultimately led me to where I am today, why I am standing behind this microphone, why I produce this podcast, because I know what it's like to be at the very bottom. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to be buried in debt, have no money, have no education, and feel like you have no hope. But I also know what it is to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get back up when you have no reason to keep going and to keep going. I've thought about this a lot. I used to be so afraid of telling people my story of being divorced and being a child sexual abuse victim and being a battered woman. I used to think that if people knew this about me, they would think less of me. And there may be people who do think less of me, and good riddance is what I have to say to you. If you're that judgmental of a person, then good riddance. I'm not the right person for you. I am not somebody who is supposed to inspire you. But that is exactly the place I came to, is I came to understand that I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm not supposed to be everybody's cup of tea. It's impossible. I was trying to attain something that was literally impossible. But I've also come to realize that I'm not inspired by people who are like, yeah, so I was born in the perfect family and I had the perfect situation and I always had money and I've always felt great about myself and my body has always been perfect and my relationships are perfect. I am not inspired by that and I am not interested in that. And some people are, but not very many, because even the perfect life, if you can't tell, if you haven't learned anything, if you've never done anything hard, if you've never made any mistakes, what are you doing with your life? I have this wonderful calendar that one of my mentors shared with me. And I like to, keep some of the ones that are inspiring to me. And I love this one from Theodore Roosevelt. The only man who never makes a mistake is the man who never does anything. And so I came to realize that for years I didn't tell people my story and I didn't use the mistakes I've made and the hard lessons in life I've learned. I didn't use them to help other people because I was afraid of them, instead of seeing them as the gift that they are. Do I wish I made some of these mistakes? No. I wish I had dealt with my child sexual abuse at a young age so I didn't enter into abusive relationships. So learn from me. If you have dealt with trauma as a child, get healthy before you get into a relationship. If you are already in a relationship and it's not as happy as it should be, but you haven't dealt with your childhood trauma, that may be part of the reason. You're a broken person trying to function in a broken relationship. Take care of yourself. Heal yourself. I came to realize that while I don't have to be proud of the mistakes I made, I can use them to help encourage other people and say, I've walked down that road. I can tell you how to get out of that hole. Most importantly, I can give you hope. It's been fascinating because I read John Maxwell's book, Change Your World. And he encourages you to join one of his free transformation tables on changeyourworld.com. So the first thing I did was take his advice. I'm like, okay, you know what? This man has changed the world, so I'm going to take his advice. If he says join a transformation table, I'm going to join one. So I had my first transformation table last week. And basically what it is 6 weeks of going through a single value that is critical to changing the world. And you just talk about that value. So you incorporate it into your core value system. And this week's value was hope. And one of the things he said in the materials that was so profound is that hope is superior to optimism because it's optimism with action. Hope is superior to optimism. So what I'm standing here behind this microphone telling you is not fake optimism. If you just get the right mindset, the world's going to be great, which is partially true, by the way. But that's not what I'm sitting here. I'm giving you real, tangible hope from somebody who was hopeless at one point in my life. And all I did was decide one day that I was not going to be unhealthy anymore. I decided I was going to stop making the same mistakes over and over again. Have you ever done that before? Have you ever just realized that you keep getting in your own way? And I decided I was going to learn everything I needed to learn to grow into the person I had to grow into, to stop repeating bad behaviors in my life. And that shift in mindset, that determination to find the best version of myself is what propelled me out of imposter syndrome into where I am today. Now, do I stand behind this microphone and tell you I have 100% confidence? No. But you know why I don't have imposter syndrome when I stand behind this microphone anymore? Because two things. First of all, I have accepted that not everybody's going to like me. Take a deep breath. Accept the fact that not everybody's going to like you. One of my favorite books that helped me get some clarity around this is The Courage to Be Disliked. What the entire purpose of that book is to learn how to focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't. And guess what you can't control? What other people think of you. You have no control over that. Don't stress out about what you can't control. And then the other thing I decided to do is I decided to be the most genuine and authentic version of myself. And it's still a work in progress. I still have to catch myself going, oh, Tiana, are you putting on that mask again? Is fear behind that motivation? Or are you showing up and being the most genuine version of yourself? And I got to be honest with you, when I started this, I didn't know exactly what that looked like. And I know a year from now, I'm going to be better at that than I am today because I'm practicing every day with you guys on being honest, being raw, being open, being genuine, being authentic, telling you my scars, telling you my painful stories, saying to you I carried a scarlet letter around. I mean, it's not a real pretty look, by the way, for a pastor's daughter to be divorced twice. Because after my first marriage, the second relationship I got into was just another unhealthy, abusive marriage. I got married twice, back to back, to people who were not healthy people for me to have in my life. Being divorced twice, that's like a scarlet letter and a half. And as a Christian woman, even more so, there are some denominations who teach, because of everybody interprets the Bible different ways. I'm not going to get into this, but because of some interpretations of the scripture, that you should never marry a woman who's divorced. And so I was not only like that girl, but I had the scarlet letter, and I literally had guys tell me I can't date you because you're divorced, which is fine because they weren't the right person for me. But that doesn't help when you're trying to deal with getting healthy and healing, having people tell you what's wrong with you all the time. Yes, I'm perfectly aware. I had to pay the divorce attorney. Thank you for that. But I came to realize as I've gone on this journey that I don't do anybody any good pretending to be something I'm not. You don't do anybody in your life any good pretending to be somebody you're not. So feeling like you're an imposter, feeling like if people really knew who you were, they wouldn't like you. That's normal. Those are the stories we're telling ourselves when we're dealing with imposter syndrome. We're telling ourselves that people have this expectation of us to be something we're not. And so we have to just pretend to be that thing until you get found out. I want you to stop if you feel like you struggle with imposter syndrome. And I want you to think about an area in your life where you feel like you're an imposter. For a lot of people, this is work. I know moms who feel like imposters, like, how in the world am I going to get this child through life in one piece? Maybe you feel like an imposter to a group of friends that you hang out with. You're in book club and you really hate the books, but they're your girlfriends or your guy friends, so you're just going to sit in book club with them. Whatever it is for you, I want you to think about it. I want you to ask yourself this question. What is the story you are telling yourself about yourself? You're probably telling yourself, I'm not the person they think I am. You're probably telling yourself something like, they wouldn't like me if they knew who I really was. These tend to be the stories people who struggle with imposter syndrome tell themselves. So how do you rewrite that narrative? Well, two things. First of all, become aware of that story you're telling yourself. Listen to it. What I've come to learn about things like depression and anxiety, and again, I'm not trying to come at this from an academic perspective. I'm trying to come at this from a practical human-to-human perspective. We got lots of academics out there that can tell us all of the diagnoses and I'm not diminishing that or belittling that. I love that stuff, but that's not the purpose of this podcast. I'm not here to diagnose you. But one of the things that's fascinating about depression and anxiety is they're really more a symptom of something else. It's your body's way of telling you something's off. In some cases, that's a chemical imbalance. In other cases, that's a trauma in your past that you've not dealt with. Imposter syndrome is a symptom of something else, something inside of you saying something isn't aligning. And for most people, it's you're telling yourself a story about yourself. It's not what holds you. It's not what you are that holds you back. It's what you think you are not. And so I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be really honest when I ask you this question, because lying to yourself isn't going to solve this problem. Is the story you're telling yourself really true, or is it something you've believed for so long, you think it's true, but if you actually step back and looked at it from the outside, it's not true? Do you have unrealistic expectations of yourself? Do you care too much about what other people think about you? We've talked about this in other podcasts. One of the 5 regrets of the dying is I wish I had lived a life more true to myself and not one that others expected of me. Are you walking around beating yourself up because you have created an expectation of yourself to be somebody you're not? Maybe it's the perfectionist in you fighting because you feel like people expect perfection from you. I personally don't struggle with perfectionism, but I know a lot of people who do, because I make mistakes all the time. So I've probably gotten too comfortable with my mistakes. Oh, speaking of which, and I apologize. This is terrible of me. I should have pointed this out earlier. And I need to apologize to everybody on my podcast who listened to my Courage podcast, which was not last episode, but the episode before that. I misstated a statistic in that. I have to say right now, I take responsibility for creating quality content. It is important to me that the information I share with you is beneficial to you and it's true. Truth is a value I carry with me. I misquoted a statistic. It was not true. I'm going to take full responsibility for it. It was something I thought to be true, but I should have verified. And I did not. And I blurted it off and it was wrong. I made the comment, and I'm not going to rehash this, but I made the comment that the suicide rate amongst transgenders is 70%. That is not a true statistic. I've looked and done some research. It's very high. It's not as high as 70% though. So I apologize. I will take full responsibility for that. I meant to say that at the beginning of the episode. I'm very sorry. I'm squeezing it here in the middle, but I take full responsibility for misquoting that. I apologize for that. It's a hard statistic to actually understand because there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it's an astronomically high number, but it is not 70%. So please, I would like to apologize for that. I will do my best to correct myself anytime I make an untrue statements that I identify. So apologize for that. I didn't mean to get off on a sidetrack, but it reminded me of that. But I do have high expectations for myself. So I'm not a perfectionist, getting back to the earlier discussion. I'm not a perfectionist, but I do have high expectations for myself to produce the best version of the work I can. And whether you're a perfectionist or you're somebody like me who's a little looser about the details, but still has very high expectations of yourself, you can sometimes expect things of yourself that aren't realistic. I had, one of the benefits of coaching is that I help people come to those aha moments by just asking them questions. And I had one particular client, we were kind of talking through things, and this person was just so frustrated that they could not get the things in their life in order the way that they wanted them in order. And I just asked this person, like, is this a realistic expectation you have of yourself? And this person never stopped to ask themselves that question. They just assumed that they should be able to do all of these things. And once this person stopped and thought about it, actually, no. It's like completely unrealistic for me to be able to do all of these things I have on my to-do list. Okay, so your sense of failure is coming from unrealistic expectations. The same is often true for imposter syndrome. Our sense of imposter syndrome comes because we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and we also think other people have those expectations of us. We're so afraid of being judged or found out by somebody that we preempt that by rejecting ourselves internally before they can do it to us. So the first thing I would ask you to do is become aware of your internal dialogue and the story you're telling yourself, and ask yourself what about it is really true and what about it is being blown out of proportion. Now, on that same vein, because this is all ties in together, you may not be able to tell yourself, you may not be able to distinguish between the truth and kind of this narrative that you've told yourself over and over again. What's amazing about the brain, by the way, is it doesn't know the difference between a reality and imagination. So if your imagination has begun to fill in these narratives and tell yourself, these people don't like me, these people are going to find me out, then you probably might have a hard time understanding the truth from reality. So the next thing that I did as I went on this process of healing is I had to step back and ask myself, what does it really matter if they don't like me? If you can't separate the unrealistic expectations and the untrue things in your mind from reality yet, then maybe the easier question is, do you really care what these people think about you? Now, I realize that's kind of a double-edged sword, because in some cases, if it's your professional career, you have to say, yes, I absolutely care what my boss thinks about me. But here's what I need you to do. I need you to take a step back with me. Go with me on this process, okay? Like you, I want my boss to think I do good work, right? I do. Whose job is it to do good work? Mine, okay? So it means that it's not my boss's responsibility. It's my responsibility to show up and be the best version of myself. If I know that I'm showing up and doing my best in that moment and in that time, that is all I can expect of myself. And if that's not good enough for my boss, then that's kind of not like, how do I say this? It's not that it doesn't matter, but it's to try to have this concept that you're perfect or that you can completely be this person that you think your boss wants you to be, is to put expectations on yourself that are not realistic. If you need to grow in order to be the person your boss expects you to be, then I assume that both you and your boss know that this is an area that you're growing. If not, that sounds like a communication issue. But what I'm really getting at, and what the heart of what I'm trying to say here is, oftentimes we tell ourselves these narratives about what other people expect of us, and they're unrealistic, they're unfair. And if they're unrealistic and they're unfair and our boss doesn't understand that, is this the right person to be working for? Most of the time, good, healthy leaders acknowledge, yes, this is an area you've got to grow. So what? Everybody's got an area they've got to grow. Work on it. Keep working on it. They're on your team. A healthy environment, the people in your life are wanting you to grow because they know that the more you grow, the better you are at your job and the better you are able to contribute. Good bosses encourage growth, encourage honest self-reflection so you can grow in those areas. They don't use it as a chance to demean you. So sometimes those fears that we tell ourselves with our imposter syndrome are because we have placed unrealistic expectations on ourselves, and we believe that our bosses have placed these expectations on us. And if they are unhealthy or unrealistic expectations, the question I have to ask you is, should you be trying to live up to those unrealistic expectations? This is not, by the way, I'm not suggesting that you settle for less in your life. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that if your boss expects you to be somebody that is unrealistic, is this the right job for you? Are you putting yourself in a no-win situation? Because that can be either that you're in an unhealthy environment or you don't have a great leader, or that you're truly being asked to do something that's just not within your wheelhouse. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. If somebody asked me to diagnose a disease right now, that ain't in my wheelhouse. I'm not a medical doctor. No, I know I'm being a little bit unfair and facetious in this conversation, because this is a hard conversation to have in a one episode podcast. But what I'm really, again, the core of what I'm truly getting at is step back and ask yourself if you should care as much about what these people think about you as you think you should. Yes, I realize that your boss, and yes, I realize that they control your paycheck and they write your reports, your annual reviews. But I've had bosses who had realistic expectations of me, and I've had bosses who've had unrealistic expectations of me. And what I've often found is that those unrealistic expectations were more rooted in them and who they were than they were in me. Because the good bosses that I've had have always seen I care so much about doing good work. I like to show up for my job and deliver. I'm an overachiever. I hate not overachieving. And the bosses that have torn me down, it was really more a reflection of them than it was me. I'm not saying I didn't have areas to grow. I'm not saying that they didn't have valuable things to teach me. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that there was an unhealthy element to what they expected of me. And I had to figure that out for myself. It wasn't my boss's job to figure out what was healthy for me. So once I figured out that, okay, there's a disconnect here between my boss and I, when we sat down and had those tough conversations, if there was no reconciling that difference, I knew at that point I wasn't in the right place for me. And I took action to get out of that situation. I think sometimes we get so caught up in our scenarios that we think we have no chance. I just have to accept this for what it is. I'm here to tell you, you don't. I've walked away from amazing titles, amazing paychecks, because it wasn't healthy for me. And it was hard and it was scary. And, if you listen to people's advice about your resume, it might not have looked great. But at the end of the day, I knew more important than my resume, more important than my title, more important than my paycheck was my mental well-being. But I made sure that I did everything in my power before I decided to walk away. I got outside input. I said, okay, this is something I'm thinking about. Am I thinking about this wrong? Is there something about myself that I need to change? I went through and got every bit of feedback I could. And once I realized that this is just not the right fit for me, I got out of there. So I would encourage you to do the same thing. If you are struggling with imposter syndrome, and when you start to look at the message and the story you're telling yourself, if you realize that nothing you ever do is going to be good enough for the person you're working for, go find a healthier job. Stop telling yourself these stories that this is the best you can do and this is great and you can't find anything else. The world is a really big place. Make good, healthy decisions for yourself. Stop binding yourself in a prison of your own mental, exhausted fatigue of back and forth of all the whys and all the fear. Just tune that noise out and make truth the dialogue that you're going to embrace in your mind and your heart going forward. So the first thing I said is become aware of the message that you're telling yourself. The second thing we talked about is, should you care about the people's opinions that you're so afraid of? Should you really care? I've made so many dumb decisions in my life because I cared about people's opinions that when I asked myself, really, do I really care about this person's opinion? The answer was no. I don't even like this person. I don't respect this person. I do not respect this person. I would not choose to live my life the way that they're living their life. There's nothing about the way that they're living that I would model. I can learn from anybody, but I'm more likely to learn what I don't want to be and what I don't want than I am what I do want from observing this person's life. And then once I gave myself permission to not care what those people thought, it was so unbelievably freeing. And then lastly, the last thing I would say if you struggle with imposter syndrome, and again, this is not academic, this is just from one person who has overcome imposter syndrome to the other, is do things, and this is kind of dovetailing with the courage podcast I talked about, do things that you want to, but scare you a little bit so you can learn that you've got more gold inside of you than you've given yourself credit for. The only way to mine gold in your life, that greatness that's in you, is just to let it out. Do the thing. I'm standing here behind this microphone because I love to inspire people. And I have the gift of gab, for good or for bad. And so I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I still deal with it. Sometimes I get in here and in my mind, I'm going, who the heck are you to get up and tell people, you know who the heck I am? I'm somebody who's willing to go do the hard thing. I'm somebody who's willing to learn the things that it takes. I'm somebody who's willing to make mistakes in front of a large audience and say, oh, I screwed that up. Watch me. But I'm willing to get back on the bike after I've had a crash. I'm willing to get behind the microphone after I've made a mistake. I'm willing to share my scars with you to show you mistakes don't define you. Back to that Theodore Roosevelt quote, the man who never makes a mistake is the man who never does anything. Do something that you want to try but scares you a little bit so you can see you are more capable than you've given yourself credit for. If you can't change the dialogue in your mind and you can't seem to let go, then just start practicing it until you stop. Just do it. I had to just do it. I had to just get behind this microphone and hit record. I had to just share my stories. I had to just publish that blog. I had to just face my fears and say, I'm going to figure this out. All of these reasons that I kept myself in unhealthy jobs and unhealthy relationships and worked longer hours than I should have and pushed my family to the side and made, the fear of all these things my God. And I mean little God, the idols in my life. All of those things was just this mess of tangled lies and stories I was telling myself because I was so afraid of what people might think of me. And when I realized that I don't really care what people who don't have my same value system think of me, it was like, oh. If you and I don't value, say, human life, okay? I value human life tremendously. I think every human being is precious. I think even people who've done terrible things, there are people who've done terrible things. Have they made bad decisions with their life? Yes, but is there still the potential for them to make better decisions? Yeah. I still believe that even the most horrible person who's walked this planet maybe doesn't, I'm not saying they don't deserve justice, but I'm saying that they still could make better decisions with their life. I value all aspects of human life. If you're somebody who doesn't value all aspects of human life, and my statements about the value of human life I put out there offend you, good riddance. Right? If you don't have that same value system and you judge me for that, why would I care? And once I kind of reconciled that with myself, I realized I have created my own prison. So where are you allowing imposter syndrome to drive your thought process because you aren't listening to the internal dialogue and you're not going, wait a minute, is that really true? Are all those things I'm telling myself really true? Do I really care what these people think? Like, really, do I respect this person? Yes, they may have some control and power over my life, but should they have this kind of control and power over my life? Or have I continued to let them because I've been telling myself that this is the only option I have? I mean, I was so afraid because I didn't have a college degree of leaving jobs because nobody's going to hire me for what I'm worth because as soon as they find out I don't have a degree. I don't want to work for somebody who that's the only value they place on me. If you can't see the other benefits I bring simply because I didn't go to college, we're not a good fit for each other. And I lived in this personal hell for years out of fear. And then one day I woke up and I smelled the coffee and I was like, this is crazy. Should you really care about these people, what they think about you? Don't care about the opinions of people you don't respect. If somebody who does not value the things that you value judges you, so what? I can't tell you like how many times kids say the darndest things. And because I have a really close relationship with my nieces and nephews, sometimes we'll give them a Christmas present or a birthday present and they'll be like, this is stupid. Do I care that a 5-year-old complains about the Christmas present I got them? I'm like, kid, listen, you're lucky I gave you anything at all, right? I just don't care. Whatever. Sorry you didn't like it. Your problem, not mine, right? Why do we care about the opinions of people who shouldn't matter to us? Why do we care about the opinions of people who we don't respect? I've heard this before. If you wouldn't take advice from somebody, don't take judgment from them either. And lastly, just do things that you want to do, but scare you a little bit. I want to get behind this microphone and I want to inspire greatness in you. I want to mine that gold in you. I want to see you become the best version of yourself because I know that your greatest life exists when you embrace the fact that you've got greatness in you and you do the work to bring that greatness forward in who you are. And I'm willing to make a fool of myself behind this microphone every week if it changes one person's life. And that's why I'm standing here. And that's why I'm sharing this message with you. Because if you struggle with imposter syndrome, everybody does. But you want to know the difference between the people who move forward and the people who don't. They don't let it hold them back. And they just keep pushing through and they reprogram that message and they reprogram that message and they tell themselves the truth and they embrace truth as a core value. I could easily allow untrue, negative, fear-based thoughts to roll through my mind and leave me in an anxious loop. I could easily do that, especially when my diet is off or I don't get enough sleep. My anxiety levels can go through the roof. I stop that. As soon as that starts to happen, I said, no. The truth of this is, even if I lost everything tomorrow, the most important things in my life are secure, and that is my family and my husband. Stop walking around in fear over things that are not the most important things in the world to me. And I just stop that message and I say, no, the truth is. No, the truth is. No, the truth is. So embrace that truth. Don't be afraid to do things that scare you a little bit. The way you push through that imposter syndrome is just to do it and get more and more comfortable being yourself. Get more and more comfortable not caring what people think. Again, that's not a disregard for wanting to. I mean, of course I want people to like me. Of course I want people to enjoy this podcast. I want as many people as possible to listen to this. I want to inspire as many people as possible. But I've accepted the fact that I'm not going to inspire everybody. And I've accepted the fact I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And I've accepted the fact that not everybody wants to be inspired by me. There's so much freedom in that. Be free. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know this was kind of a serious topic, but I really wanted to talk about it because I've had a lot of people talking to me about imposter syndrome and it's real. I don't want to diminish this, but you have everything you need to manage it. And that's why I wanted to share with you my journey and the tools that I've used to manage it. If you've learned other tips and tools, let me know. And I would love to include that on a future episode. Other ways that you've learned to manage your imposter syndrome. I've listened to some great, very famous people say, this is how I managed it. And that's kind of what I summarized in my story for you as well, is I learned from them and did a lot of those same things myself. You're ever going to be 100% confident in everything you do? Maybe, but that's not the goal for me. The goal isn't to always be 100% confident because I want to be a little bit humble. I want to be able to admit that I could learn and grow and be a little bit better. It's not about being 100% confident in everything I do. It's about being willing to do it even without the confidence. So on that note, let's close this podcast with a quote. I've said it about 8 times. I'm going to say it again because it's a good quote. It's not what you think you are that holds you back. It's what you think you are not. You are more capable than you think you are. You have greatness in you. I know that because I felt like somebody who had nothing to offer anybody but a bunch of broken pieces of a broken life. And I found that by just being somebody who embraced growing, embraced humility, a little bit of courage, and a lot of words, that there was something better inside of me than I ever believed possible. You have so much more greatness inside of you than you believe possible. Go unleash it. The world needs it. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode or this content, please be sure to tell your friends and family. Word of mouth is the best way to spread podcasts. Like, subscribe, leave a review. All of that gets this podcast circulating. Thank you guys for joining me on this journey. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to share this journey with all of you. We're in this together. We're a team. And I thank you for being a part of this team. I'm looking forward to seeing how, as you achieve your greatness, you change the world around you, because that's really what this is all about. As you become stronger and as you become more confident and as you become more courageous, you're going to make the world a better place because you get to show other people that they can do that too. And the more people we have running around this country free from all these unnecessary worries and imposter syndrome, the greater we're going to be. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great one. Thank you for tuning in. For additional content, including my blog and social media, see my website, tianashowy.com. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe, leave a review, and be sure to tell your friends and family, anyone else that you think might enjoy joining us on this journey. Until next time.